Say, this is going to be good. I met Bill for the first time Tuesday, and what he does is he works at the corner of conflict resolution and racial justice, where they meet. And his services have been sought out from organizations like businesses to the Naropa Institute. So tonight you're going to be able to go home with something. I'm not talking about a cake or a bottle of wine.
I want a cake and a bottle of wine.
What we're talking about here is less substantive and potentially longer lasting. Bill Say.
Thanks. We hear it, Occupy is a fantastic organization, and so if you don't already, if you're not already in connection with Occupy, check them out. If you have a few dollars that you can spare to help support their fantastic work, I think there'll probably be a basket around. Okay, so please consider that. So thank you for inviting me to do the teach-in. Where's Emerald? Is Emerald here? Oh, there you are. Thank you so much, Emerald, for inviting me to do the teach-in. Thank you, Occupy, for having me. It's a great pleasure. I do know that I think if I sit in this chair, I'm going to get a little passive. I already feel like kind of a tendency to kind of sink back in the chair. So I think I'm going to stand up like what Rebel was modeling. I think I'm going to start with this. When I do public talks, I often work on myself for just a minute because how many of you get nervous when you have to speak in public? Yeah. Okay, that's almost all of you. So there's really interesting, funny ways how we get anxious when we're speaking in public. So is it okay if I take a minute? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to notice what I notice in the moment. And I notice that my chest is tight. Yeah, I'm coughing. I just got over a cold, but I notice it's tighter now than it was a half hour ago. So I'm thinking, it might be something to do with doing this presentation, making me a little bit tight in the chest, a little tighter than I was. So notice that's there, and I'm making this kind of gesture with my hands. Yeah. So what could that be? Could take a while to get to this, but sometimes you just have to be brave. You go, well, what is happening in my body? And you make a little jump. So the jump, I would say, because I was working on my lower back earlier today, because my lower back was starting to seize up a little bit. I got another work thing that got piled on, and I noticed my lower back started to get kind of like, I was going, am I going to be able to do this thing tonight? Can I drive for an hour or hour and a half? And this reminds me a little bit of my lower back thing. And so I'll just say, I'm going to take the jump and maybe think that it might be related. Something with my lower back was also suggesting, as well as any stress or muscular thing that was going on, which is, Bill, stay close to yourself. I know you have these things coming. I know you're anxious about these things, but darn it, stay close to yourself, inside of yourself, trust yourself. Don't worry about so much. You worry too much. So how was that? I don't know. It's funny. I'm slightly a little bit better. So, okay, that's it. So tonight, when Emerald and I were talking, we were kicking around a little bit. What should be the topic? What should be the topic? I've taught on this and I've taught on that. I used to teach at UC Berkeley Extension School of Professional Communication. Now I'm teaching at California Institute of Integral Studies. I'm teaching on diversity stuff. Now I'm going to be teaching on stuff about how society impacts the body. Yeah, it's going to be a great course. I'll be starting there in a couple of weeks. Now, so I started thinking about Occupy and the great work they're doing to try to create a more equal, equitable world and, local, Santa Rosa, Bay Area, what have you. Yeah, it's a great thing to do. And one of the things that gets in the way of being equal is people having more power. Yeah, would you agree? People having more power and then pushing other people out. Yeah? One way to call that is marginalizing people. Another way to call that is pushing people out. Another way of calling that is making a group the other. Those Muslim people, those homeless people, those gay people, those whatever kind of people, and somehow making them outside of things. So it's harder to access social resources. It's harder to get fair treatment with the justice system or the police. harder to get a loan at the bank, harder to have your voice heard, harder to do all kinds of things. Those are some of the effects of marginalization. And I'm sure that some of you know some of these things, about some of these things directly, or you're concerned about them, and maybe gravely so. It's a serious situation. So that's what we kind of came upon, was this idea about self. Yeah, there's who I am, there's who we are, roughly, but then there's this other. Yeah? So that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit tonight, and then go into two things. I want to talk a little bit about public forums. That just popped up today. I want to talk about community forums that can address these issues that have to do with the other, and how a community or a society will somehow ignore, oppress, marginalize a group for all kinds of reasons. Yeah? And then the other thing I want to do, Rebel suggested it, is give you a little bit of a tool that you can go home, let's say work on things with a roommate, a spouse, a team member in your work scene, someone in your community that maybe you're struggling with a little bit. Yeah, that sound good? Okay. So a little bit about me. Actually, Rebel already said it. So I work at this intersection over and over again of human differences, not just race, but yeah, race, but all these ways that we're different. Like people have different gender identities and sexual orientations and races and ethnicities, religions, socioeconomic backgrounds, all these different things, religions, political views. Yeah, we have political views that are different. But people also have different ways of doing things. People have different perspectives on a given thing. And sometimes we struggle with those differences. Yeah, would you agree? Yeah, would you? Yeah. And sometimes those differences or those struggles with the differences create difficulty. It creates tension, sometimes failed relationships, family members getting pushed out of the scene, team members that don't get listened to, people who can't work together, and sometimes worse. Yeah, yeah, happens every day, right? So the thing that I would say is this: for individuals, but also for groups, it's really natural, it's really healthy to form a self, to form an identity and say, this is who I am. Yeah? Because when we do that, we have a little bit of a sense of who we are, and we can often then also have a sense of direction. This is what I'm about in life, for example. That's a great thing. Yeah? Here's the thing, though. With that, again, that could be individual, but it could also be a group identity that forms over time. This is what we're about, for example. Occupy Santa Rosa. This is what we're doing. This is what we're interested in. This is what we want to create in terms of change. Yeah? But the natural thing that also occurs is when we start to form an identity, is we often seem to form others, that people, groups, experiences that we think somehow, that's not me. I'm this kind of person, those are those kinds of people. Yeah? Pretty natural, happens all the time. Yeah? And on the one hand, I think it's natural, and on the other hand, sometimes it can be really, really problematic. Yeah? And some of the reasons why it can be problematic is when a group of people, for example, within a larger society, gets marginalized, gets targeted, gets stigmatized, gets oppressed, pushed out, has fewer rights, gets worse treatment, yeah? Is not understood. Yeah? And sometimes this kind of thing, the tendency can get manipulated, sometimes by politicians. Oh, yeah, it seems to happen. Yeah, seems to happen. So the process of self and other, while it's natural, is also something that can be really important if we're interested in better family life, if we're interested in better romantic relationships, friendships, teamwork, better organizational functioning, community life, societal life, etc. And who taught us how to get along across big differences? Yeah. I know that for myself, I don't think I got a really decent education about working with differences until I was well in my adulthood. Yeah. Mostly I was just like, well, I don't like the way you do things, so the heck with you. Yeah. That's kind of what I learned, more or less. Yeah. You're stupid. Go away. I want to stay separate from you. Yeah. But sometimes there's a cost. Yeah. We keep the other, I'll call it the other, and sometimes there starts to be a cost. Yeah. Seems like maybe the family's not doing so well because we've taken this one family member and we say, that person is just bad. That person's not like us. Or we do it to our spouse or our partner. I used to like that person, but I don't know. Now I'm thinking I'd rather spend my time at work, etc. Okay? So maybe there's a point where you think, I'm afraid to deal with this, but maybe this other group, or this other person, or sometimes it's a style or perspective that we have struggled with over time with different people who represent that style. We just can't stand that style or that perspective. Whether it was our first grade teacher, a parent, later it was a boss, etc. It's like, oh, it's that terrible style. But then finally we say, maybe I'll deal with it. Yeah, maybe I will. Yeah. So that's the hope, actually. Because I think most of us have that kind of situation where we think, well, I've really started to lose connection with that person. I started to not want to talk to that person. I started to feel more separate from that person. We leave that person out of meetings, etc., etc. But maybe, here's the hope, is maybe a couple of you or more will take something from tonight and you'll play with that situation. That would be exciting. So let's see. Let me look at my notes for a second. Oh, let me say something else about my background, because this is important. It kind of informs some of the thinking I have and the views that I want to share with you. Okay. Also like to hear your views. So I got trained in something called process work. It's the process-oriented psychology of Arnie and Amy Mindell. And I learned a lot about differences and community and conflict from the Mindells. And so I really thank them a lot. So one idea, one of the main ideas in process work is the idea, yes, there's democracy, but there's also what Mindell coins as deep democracy, which is the idea that says that all people, parts, and levels of reality may be necessary for sustainable change.
What was that word?
Deep democracy. Put an exclamation point. So for example, let's say Gary and I shake on an agreement. We've been talking about this thing, and I say, yeah, Gary, I think I want to do it. What do you notice? How likely is this to sustain itself? Yeah, it's a good idea, Gary. What did you notice?
You didn't look.
What's that?
You didn't look at me.
Right, I'm looking away. Maybe something is kind of like, and I made a little bit of a sour face. I'm thinking, this agreement will last 2 days, maybe. Yeah, but maybe in deep democracy, we honor that there's also body sensations. So Gary says, well, Bo, he calls me Bo, that's his nickname I have. He says, you said yes, you said let's do it, but I noticed you looked away from me. And I said, I did? You're right. I'm looking towards something else. I notice, and I'm playing with this a little bit, but I actually notice it. I notice that when I look away, I feel more free. And I realize there's still some things about our agreement where I feel overly constricted. So I'm not done negotiating yet. How can I feel more free in our agreement? I don't know yet, but let's keep talking. And then maybe that part gets worked out and we actually come to a more sustainable agreement. Maybe. Yeah? That's a little example of deep democracy. Yeah, because democracy says, for example, that all people, well, that may be in flux right now, all people should be welcome and admitted to, different institutions. You can't just close the door to certain people. That's what democracy says. But deep democracy is not covered in that because the sign may say all are welcome, but people's attitudes may not go along with that. And so investigating people's feelings and relationships can be part of a deeper democracy. Yeah? So with this in mind, I want to just note 3 levels of reality that I want to go into a little bit tonight. So deep democracy says all people, parts, and levels of reality. So the first level of reality, is this going to be too much theory? Let me think. It might be, so I'm going to be short with it. Consensus reality is the reality that most people could consent to, agree to. Today is Monday, January, whatever it is, It's the facts, it's the issues, and it's the actual people involved. Bill, Say, and Gary. Okay, we're the actual people. Okay? It's a really important level of reality when we're thinking about differences. Yeah? He said this, she said that, etc. Okay? So far, so good? Okay. Second level of reality. What the Mandels called dreamland. Now, this is the level of background, feelings, but also roles that are shared. So for example, a role that's shared is like, let's say in this example of the agreement that Gary and I were having, there's a role of somebody who wants more freedom. Well, it might turn out that I'm not the only one who wants more freedom in the agreement. It might turn out that role is shared. Let's say Gary says, well, now that you say it, Bo, I also want more freedom in our agreement. Yeah? So that's a role. It's a shared role. Now here's the thing about it that's really cool, is this. At the consensus reality level, usually what happens with this, when you're thinking about the other, is there's a society that is marginalizing an other. And that's a really important level of reality. Because at that level, there's oftentimes measurable negative impact for those others. Yeah? Marginalization, oppression, etc. Okay? Really important. But here's the thing. At the dreaming level, the role of the other can be shared. And here's why this could be potentially important. So let's say if I consider myself as someone who's more the mainstream, I'm not the other. I'm somebody who tends to be more included, more privileged, okay? But if I also share the role of the other, it may help me to say, I usually don't think of myself as being the other, but now that you talk about the situation with this certain group, I realize in that group, I am the other. They don't want to listen to me there. They think I'm crazy, etc. And then I start to have a little bit of an experience where I too am the other. And then this group of people that I have maybe judged and say, oh no, they're the other, maybe I get a little bit of a doorway into thinking, oh, I know a little bit of what they're experiencing. Yeah? So that's one application of the other. Here's the other one. In consensus reality, let's say you take a certain environment where people are split, they're conflicted, they're stuck, yeah? It's like, Ugh. Well, at this level, if roles are shared, then sometimes what can happen is that people can start switching their roles. Not only am I the oppressed, sometimes with no power, but I can also be the one who has some power. Maybe I too can be a little oppressive. I just don't think of myself that way. So people can start to switch around into different experiences. And if you've ever been in a polarized conflict where you have held one position and the other person has held another position, sometimes switching roles can de-escalate the conflict in a minute. It is really an interesting thing. So, and it takes a little bit of practice. Yeah. If you're critical with me, I might be defensive. But let's say I switch roles and I get into the critic and I say, yeah, Bill say he's sometimes kind of stupid, and you're right. You're right for criticizing me. I think I was doing X, Y, and Z wrong. And then all of a sudden you don't have to fight with me anymore because I too can be the one who criticizes Bill. And sometimes for a good reason. Yeah, it's a little example. Yeah. Last level. It's a level that we call in process work essence. And it's kind of what it sounds like. Is, for example, when a group of people is having an experience, maybe there's some conflicts, maybe there's some differences, and then things shift. And all of a sudden the group seems to be experiencing like a common ground, a common direction. We've come to a place, maybe a temporary resolution, clarity, whatever it is, essence. And then how many of you sometimes facilitate things? Yeah? Yeah, a lot of you. Yeah. So let's say you're facilitating something in your family, in your team, in your community. Being a facilitator and being in touch with essence can be really important, because if you're in touch with essence to some degree, I think you will find that you have more ability to include all kinds of people, perspectives, experience. Sometimes when we're facilitators and we're too much in our little facilitator identity, we're for some things and some people, and we're against others. I know, as Bill say, I'm sometimes too limited, but I have another part of me that's a little bit like the ocean. And from my ocean self, I have more ability to be open to all kinds of people. Essence. Okay, so let me look at my notes for just a second. So far, so good?
Yes.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay, I'm thinking that as far as the other goes.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of, say, for example, you have a group that does something.
Mhm.
You know, let's say they plan to plant poppies.
Okay.
Everybody gets together, they're gonna plant poppies.
Yeah.
And then someone comes in and they wanna plant poppies too.
Yeah.
But they won't let you in.
Right.
So, in that diagram, what place are you?
Depends. Could be, it could be any of the levels, but oftentimes these levels are happening simultaneously. It's just that these two levels usually are not looked at. So mostly people will stand on consensus reality. They say, well, we're not going to let you join our poppy planting group because you haven't lived in the city for more than 6 months. I'm sorry, we have a rule, it's in our bylaws that says to be a poppy planter member, you have to live in the city for 6 months plus 1 day or more, for example, right? But let's say this person comes in and says, that's baloney. I know in my feelings, and that starts to get into dreaming. As soon as I walked in that door, people's faces, people were laughing, people were smiling, but as soon as I walked in, people started frowning, and I felt immediately unwelcome. And so they might say, I hear your consensus reality reason that says I have to be living in the city for 6 months one day, but I want to confront you on the fact that I think your group is unwelcoming. And the group might go, whoa, right? But if you learn, for example, some of the fluidity between self and other in different situations, you might be able to not only get defensive and say, no, we're a welcoming group. You may be able to get a little bit into the other and realize, the one who doesn't feel welcome. Oh, you know what? I have also felt that a few times. And then you can maybe say to this person, you know what? I hate to admit it, but I think you're right. I think as a group, we're actually unwelcoming. So as soon as you walked in, I'm not surprised that you felt unwelcome, and I'm not frankly surprised that we said no to you. I want us as a group to work on our unwelcoming behavior, and I want you to come join our group. That would be a little example. Yeah? Yeah. And you know what? People can do that kind of thing. We can face our own sexism. We can face our own homophobia. We can face our own racism. We can face our own classism, etc. And we can look at these things. We really can. Yeah, we can. It's possible. Yeah? But here's the thing. We often don't. Because it's messy, it's difficult, it's uncomfortable. But it happens every day for those reasons and more, that people get shut out, they get treated poorly, they don't feel welcome, they have health problems because of it, etc. Yes?
But isn't the fact that they're part of the group that's keeping people out, doesn't that give them a certain privileges? And that's
Of
why,
course.
That's why
Of
they
course.
keep people out. So they need some motivation to
That's
say,
right.
you know, we need to share this privilege, and
That's right.
then
You
they think
got
they're
it
going
right.
to take something I have, and then,
That's right.
you know.
Yeah, and the motivation may come for different reasons. It may come from because it's just the right thing to do.
Okay, that's good.
Or maybe there's a terrible conflict, and people start to say, we have to deal with this conflict. Yeah, for example, there can be different reasons. Or maybe, let's say the person who gets pushed out says, I'm going to get more of the community behind me, and I want to confront this group that is so close-minded. Sometimes it happens through confrontation. But then here's the thing. Who can facilitate that? And I want to suggest you can. And you can do a great job of it, probably as you are. But if this is a new practice for you of getting into the other, I want to suggest it will help your facilitation a little bit if you work on practicing getting into the position of the other. You walk by someone on the street and for whatever reason you judge that person. For whatever reason. Become that other person in your imagination. Oh, I noticed I had this judgment about them. Become that other person and imagine their response. Then imagine a different variation of that person. And what is their response? And then yet again, another variation of that person. And then you may feel, oh, that person's really a human being. I was just in my inner racist, sexist, homophobic, classist, etc. self. Yeah? You can work on these things. You get more fluidity. Let's say you're in a meeting. How many times are you in a meeting and someone says something or the way they say something just drives you crazy? Yeah? You get reactive to it, yeah? Learn to get into that other perspective. Have your reaction. Oh, I hate that perspective. I hate that style of communication. Drives me crazy. Yes, have that reaction, but then get a little bit. Imagine that you get into, it's like that folk saying, walk a mile in someone's shoes before you judge them. And that's the practice. It's so simple when you hear it like that. But the practice of it, especially when things are hot and conflicted, that's a different story. It takes practice. Get into those other shoes, that other perspective. Yeah, I hated this style, but when I get into the shoes of that other perspective, I can kind of see why. I understand why they're communicating that way, or I'm guessing I understand. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right. But I start to see maybe there's a reason for that urgency, for that pushiness, for that strict, tight point of view, etc., etc., etc. You're a little bit more open to that way. Yes?
How does our consciousness of that we develop those kind of ideas and kind of put people in other groups, how does that help the others? I do community outreach with diverse cultural groups, but a lot of those groups, because they've been marginalized for so long, they've taken on the identity of the other.
Yeah.
And that's really hard, even though I'm very aware and conscious of why they feel that way. It's so difficult to get them away from that, it's you
Right.
against me, it's us and them. So
Yeah.
how does our consciousness of this help the others?
Let me just make sure I'm understanding. You're saying that for a group that has had so much experience of being the other, they really identify with being other,
Yes.
and they feel less than. They may doubt themselves. They may self-criticize themselves. They may feel less than. Yes?
Yeah, and in some of the outreach that I've done, it's very challenging for them to accept that our organization is really genuinely
Sure.
doing outreach and that we want to bring them in.
There's the trust issue.
Mhm.
Yeah. So one of the things is, you're saying it right there, it's a relationship building process. It's a relationship and trust building process, I think, first and foremost. Yeah. And then if it's appropriate, but you're doing community outreach, you may start to put up frameworks that suggest things around inclusion, marginalization, oppression, etc. And maybe, if you listen to what they're saying, you're just basically underlining and emphasizing what they're saying. Because probably if they're talking about what problems they're having in the community, they might not be naming it as oppression, for example. They're not naming it as like being the other, but they'll probably use language and they'll have things that they'll say that go along with that kind of experience. And you say, that's it right there. You're talking about a way that your group has been ignored. You're talking about a way where your group has been put down. You're talking about a way your group has been judged. Yeah? And now I'm hearing it. You've experienced it for so long, you see yourself the same way. Yeah? But then it could be a process where you see, but is that where you want to leave it? Or do you think there's a possible way to address community life so that your group actually gets more equal position in the larger community? Because maybe they say it's hopeless. There's too much racism. There's too much sexism. There's too much classism. It'll never happen. And you say, I completely understand that you think there's no hope. How can I help? Or maybe they think, well, I don't have much hope, but do you have a suggestion? And then maybe you have a suggestion how to address these things within your organization, for example. Yeah. One of my favorites. So here's one of the main things. One of the two main interventions that I really love is the public open forum. So let's say you're working with this group within your organization. You realize, are you in Santa Rosa?
No, I'm in San Jose.
San Jose. Okay. So maybe you realize that this is actually an issue that the whole city needs to address, and maybe with different partners, you start to organize a public forum in San Jose on the issue of X. How maybe a certain group has been marginalized for decades. Yeah. And you get different stakeholders involved, you get different groups involved, and you get people that don't necessarily agree with you. Yeah. Yeah. One of the great things that's also challenging when you have a public open forum, let's say, for example, on the issue of racism, I've done some public open forums on race, is to get people who are really want to confront racism, really want to dismantle and change racism, but you also try to get some people who are a little bit racist. Yeah? Because what it does is, because if you don't, here's another part of Dreamland. Another kind of role that's really common in group and community processes and families, etc., is the ghost role. And especially in liberal circles, it's really politically incorrect to say that you have any racist tendencies, sexist tendencies, homophobic tendencies, ageist tendencies, etc. So it stays a little bit like a ghost. So you're talking about racism, but no one's saying, well, that's me a little bit. But as a facilitator, it might be right for you to say, well, actually, I think most of us are not completely neutral when it comes to gender, race, sexual orientation, etc., etc. Yeah? That most of us have a part. We're more comfortable with certain kinds of people and less comfortable with other kinds of people. And so maybe it gives a little bit more room for this part to come out. So case in point, I was teaching at the school, CIIS, a couple years ago, and I was using my male privilege to really silence one of the female students. She had a strong idea, and I said no. It was really harsh, and I was stressed, whatever. But it was clearly an expression of my male privilege and power. Yeah? And she and other classmates were really pissed off at me, rightfully so. So but it wasn't going away. It's like 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, the atmosphere was still in the grips of that one moment. So finally I said, I think we have to go back to this moment, and I want to name a role that I was expressing, which is a male oppressive role. Let's explore it. We explored it for maybe 45 minutes. One part that says, I'm male, I feel like I should be the one who has the power and the say, and that's the way it should be. And then the other role that was oppressed by this, impacted by this, we got to say, well, the heck with you. That's really, it makes me so mad and it's so hurtful and I want to just put you down, right? We went back and forth on this. We even switched roles. It was a 45-minute process, which is nothing. And you know what? The environment completely changed. Yeah, it was amazing. It was like the most meaningful teaching moment of the whole semester. I learned something really big, and the students did too. But it took kind of entering into some of these roles. So I think, as facilitators, can you hold the different roles, including some of the roles that are, kind of unsavory? Yeah? So one idea with some of these community issues is to think about holding consider holding public open forums. And there's a great book by my teacher Arnold Mindell. It's called, I really recommend this book. It's a guide to how to organize and facilitate an open forum. Really recommend it. If there's an issue that you're really concerned about in the community, you want to address it in the community, consider organizing and facilitating open forum. It's a fantastic way to bring in different points of view, encourage dialogue, and see if you can get people to connect across differences. It's a great thing. I did one a few years ago around the issues of physical danger, police, and youth in the city of Richmond. We had the mayor came out, police, youth activists, different nonprofits, and it was a great dialogue. One of the things that boiled down to was one of the youth activists had a really sharp interaction with one of the police. And it was a great thing. We just stayed there for a little bit, where the police, they had a really earnest, sincere desire to help out, but the youth was really holding his ground and saying, you can't just show up like this as you are like this, we need to know who you are. You're not going to come in your uniform, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it was this amazing, unusual dialogue. It was like the heart of it. You can actually see it on YouTube. If you go to Open Forum Youth Richmond, you could see it. It was filmed. It was an awesome moment. And then I invited people to connect to somebody that they didn't know. And then people who would normally not talk to each other were talking about this issue of physical violence, not feeling safe, the presence of the police, et cetera, et cetera. It was amazing. People were like, wow. People were talking in this really amazing way about this issue. So that's one thing I wanted to really just name is public open forums. Any comments or questions about holding a public open forum? Yes.
It seems like you really want to address those assumptions and those things in the subconscious that have formed over time with yourself.
As a facilitator, as a community
Well, no,
member?
if we get into that second realm of dreamland,
Mm-hmm.
that we're to take into account, it's just not our intellect saying we recording what our five senses are saying as consensus reality.
Yeah.
We're dealing also with people that have a past, including myself.
Yes.
So we have those influences, and we're being more conscious of those other influences.
Yeah.
is what
Yes.
you're saying. And so,
Yes.
and also not to be afraid to bring those underground influences up to the top, because that's healthy. That's the
Well,
way we're
to
going
not be
get it.
afraid, that would be great, but also I think it's really natural to be afraid of them, and because things can blow up, but sometimes things blow up, but if you can stay with them, you can process the explosions. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a big thing what you're talking about, and I love what you're talking about, because in this dreaming realm, you're thinking about, for example, diversity, you're thinking about these different experiences, these different feelings, these ways that we project upon others. There's so much there. There's so much to learn from. But in this dreaming realm, this middle zone, there's also the possibility where things can become more fluid. Where in consensus reality, you are you and I am me. Would you agree? In consensus reality. But the dreaming level, maybe I discover in a little bit of time with you that I'm also a little bit like you. Oh, I didn't know that. Maybe a little bit different, but it's to some degree, I'm a little bit like you. And maybe you learn that in some way, you're a little bit like me. And that's some of the possibility of the dreaming realm. Yes?
Yeah, what's becoming apparent to me is that this is a real personal interaction thing.
It could be personal.
And what brought this to mind is what the woman from San Jose was mentioning, because in Marin, I'm from San Rafael, the Marin city, it's, well, historically it's been mostly black, but a lot of people of color there.
Yeah.
They've been fighting for a long time to get the space improved, but now they've got to the point that they've got the political powers ready to improve it, but in such a way that they're going to lose their space. That the people who live there now won't be able to stay there, that they'll move down.
Wow.
So there's a lot of knowing what my oppression is and what my condition, and not wanting to change it because of that, because you don't know what worst place you might go to. So, it might not happen in a room like this, but.
Or it might.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I take a kind of political active, vision to what you're trying to say. And
Yeah.
trying to interpret it to.
Right. Well, it's also just trying to understand the scenario you described. That also sounds like a complex scenario.
Oh, yeah.
Certain positive change was starting to happen, but it looks like it starts to backfire and actually be worse for the people.
Yeah.
That suggests that more activism, more of a fight needs to happen. Yeah, thanks for that. So I want to make one distinction. So a really important level of the other is this. Within a certain social context, like a larger societal context, there's a group that has become or deemed or targeted as the other. Yeah? And in this country, that has been true for reasons of gender, race, sexual orientation, age, ability, etc., etc. Yeah? Yeah? It's just been true. Marginalized, deprived of certain rights, etc., etc. It's a really important level of looking at the other. Okay? The second level that I want to describe is a kind of a more informal way where anyone can be the other within a given context. You could be the most privileged mainstream person, but then let's say you go home to visit your family, and all of a sudden you are the other again. Yeah, for example. Yeah? Or maybe you belong to a group that has been chronically marginalized in this country, but maybe in another context you are the mainstream one for some reason, and you may be the one, maybe, who otherizes another person within that subgroup. So this is the second kind of other thing. It's more of an informal way of looking at the other, and it's more associated with this dreaming realm. But again, one of the potential benefits of looking at this other level of being the other is that it can give anyone the experience. It's like, oh yeah, I too know what it's like to be the other. Let me see how I can use that experience to help with my team, my family, community, etc. maybe a way to gain more understanding or empathy, etc. Okay? It's kind of like this. It's like, if you look at racism, for example, I think it's a really clear way to look at it to say that it's people of color in this country are the ones who are bearing the brunt of racism. However, anyone can be and experience racial prejudice. That's a different thing. Okay? Do you see that distinction? So I just think it's an important one to make. Well, it's really gotten warm here.
I missed that. Will you repeat that?
Yeah. So sometimes people say, well, for example, let's say I'm not a person of color. Let's say I'm a white person who says, well, I too have been the subject of racism. Well, arguably, no. Arguably, white people have been the subject of racial prejudice. I think it's important to distinguish, and this is arguable. Not everyone agrees about this, but I want to take a stand here and say that, no, actually, in this context that I know, which is the US, it's people of color who have been the main target and who bear the main brunt of racism. Could you follow that?
Yeah.
You might not agree, but that's just what I want to say. I want to make that distinction because I think it's an important one. Because there you find, for example, the weight of history. You find measurable ways where, for example, people of color suffer lesser health, greater barriers to accessing social resources, a worse treatment in the criminal justice system and by police, et cetera, et cetera. It's measurable.
Yeah, I just missed the distinction you made, but now I got it.
Okay.
I'm on board.
Okay, and I'm just putting out some ideas. You don't have to agree, but I just want to put some things out. Maybe it stimulates a little thinking or conversation. So, yes,
Okay, I'm back to your woman in the classroom.
yes.
What if you're the type of professor that's not open to that? I mean, I've been in situations where, you walk
I
in.
wasn't open initially.
So how do you proceed?
Well, you proceed, the way I proceeded was, I did pick up that, okay, I initially got, reactive, I was, in my male authority, just shutting her up. But then I did hear enough, I said, I think I was misusing my male authority. And that actually brought a little bit of relief to her. She said, oh my God, I've been in the male corporate world for 10 years and I've never gotten an apology from male peers that, treated me like shit. You were the first one. But it wasn't enough to go away. But then I noticed, even though it wasn't a full resolution, because I wasn't fully aware of what I was doing, I noticed that the atmosphere stayed tense. And I started to think, it's because of what happened. And then I checked it out. Like 3 weeks later, I said to the class, I think the class is still in some kind of process because of how I was misusing my male privilege and authority. And they agreed with me. And then I said, okay, you agree with me. Let's process it. And they said, okay.
But you were open.
I was a little bit open.
But you can't, the thing that got me is that I don't want to mention, but I was in a situation where I just made a suggestion. It was just like casual.
Yeah.
Like, why not try it this way?
Right.
And it was all of a sudden, because I was new.
Yeah.
And I was like the other, all of a sudden it was like World War III.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow. So how do you go beyond that? I didn't know how to go beyond it. I just wanted to run out of the
Well, it's a great, but it's a complex question because there's so many different variables. It depends a lot on the context. Depends on who your friends are in the group. Depends on the readiness of the group. But I'm a person, I can't stand to be in a group where I'm the marginal one for too long. Just can't stand it.
No,
So I'll after a while I'll put up a fight myself. That's my style. But another style is to say, oh, okay, I get it from my first experience here. Wow, this group is really not used to having a newcomer, a woman, et cetera, come in and come out with an idea. They really don't like this. Maybe you get to know some people in the group and you find out there's other people who agree with you. You say, yeah, our group is really tight like this. We really only want to hear from the male voices, whatever it is, right? And you start to build a coalition. And maybe your coalition starts to see there is a way to start to address this. And you start to bring it up. And people get mad at you, but maybe you have a coalition that says, yes, you're getting mad, but we're not backing down. We see this as a real weakness of the culture here, and we're confronting it. Ha-ha. And you start to address it, and you have a big fight. Yay, good for you. I'm a little conscious of time. How about one more, and then I brought an exercise for you. You can play with it. Yes?
So you're in this environment there.
Yeah.
And at the first day when it happened,
Yeah.
there was like a minor resolution, right?
Okay.
Something you said, well, yeah.
In my situation? Or
Yeah, yours.
Okay.
The male,
Right.
I have to
Yes.
take it. But
Right.
for some reason, it wasn't enough to allay the distrust
Right. That's right.
among some of the students.
That's right.
And so this was something, that feeling was being carried over, and you were picking up on that feeling,
Right.
which is dreamland. Is that more
Yes,
of the dreamland
yeah,
feeling?
right.
Because it's not shared consensus. They don't
Right.
know what's inside you.
And I didn't know what was inside them.
But
Yeah.
you did know through feelings inside you that something was,
I had a guess.
that's what you're doing. So that's what you're doing. You're saying for us to be open to those feelings that are rolling in us.
Yes.
So we get out, sometimes we're so inside of our theoretical, our intellect.
Nothing wrong.
that-
I'm not putting down the theoretical because that's
but we're-
also
we're
great.
taking, we're cognizant of this other that's in us.
Trying to be aware of the different levels. Because it's good to be aware of because most of us seems like we struggle with at least one of the levels of reality at a given time. Sometimes we just don't want to deal with feelings, but feelings are there. Or sometimes we don't want to deal with the facts, but maybe the facts are important. So how can we be open to the different levels? Yeah? Let's try an exercise.
I believe.
So, if I was going to suggest one thing here, it's an idea. But this is like, you know those little, those choppers, those paper things? This thing is a piece of crap. Look what it does. It's terrible. It's a terrible thing. Anyway, here's an idea to take with you. This comes, like, I learned a lot about differences and diversity studying with the Mandels, but if I was going to sum it up, here's an idea, and you may not agree. And it's not a consensus reality thing, it's a dreamland idea or practice, is that the other, as well as being the other, is me. To some degree, in some way. And it's a great practice. It's so helpful for all kinds of relationship problems and conflicts. It's so helpful for facilitation, teamwork, family work, etc. It's a great practice. Play with it. The other is me. And this exercise is a way to play with this idea that the other is me. So excuse the funny fringes there.
Are we taking one?
Yeah, take one.
Ouch, I got a paper cut.
No liability. So, I do have to say one other piece before going to this exercise. Sometimes the other has or apparently has a quality that you find very, very unacceptable, objectionable, horrible, disgusting, etc. That's a really common thing. So we think, oh, no, that's the other. So here's an idea. Just put it out here. It's one way to think about it. Let's say this is the consensus reality level. Here's the dreamland level. Here's essence. What's a quality that you feel like, totally unacceptable? Anybody? Some kind of quality, behavior, energy that you just feel like
Negative all the time.
negative all the time. There you go. negative all the time. Okay? Let's say you even get a group of people that agree. There's some consensus, right, on this person being negative all the time, right? Okay, let's say that's the energy. But if you consider that maybe there's another level, it's a dreaming level. So let's say you get into your exploration. So it's like it's negative all the time. And you find that actually, when you get into it, there's something like a little wizard, a little bent over wizard, that's somehow going through all the little possibilities. And you say, no, not that, right? And then let's say you go even further down into what might be the essence of this particular person who's negative all the time. And you find someone who's completely discerning. And you think, I can't stand this person because it seems like they're negative all the time. But at least in my sensing of what might be the essence for me, who's having a reaction to them, maybe the essence of this person who's negative all the time is something that's like very discerning. And then you find you're a little bit less reactive to their style, maybe. So that's one way to think about it, okay? Because it comes up. People say, no, not that other person, not that other group, because of reason X. And it creates a block. That happens all the time. No, forget it. But, let me draw this. This is going back to this idea about identity. Let's say this is our wholeness, all of what we can be as a person or as a group. But let's say here you are in your identity, okay? I'm Bill Say. This is what I'm about. Ha, ha, ha. Right? But there's all this possibility of what I can be. But I don't know about that other, because I'm just here sitting in my little identity. But let's say I start to work on an other that really bothers me, disturbs me, or scares me. And let's say I integrate a little bit of the energy of the other. And I expand my sense of self. And then there's tomorrow, another other. And let's say I work and I start to integrate more of that. And then yet another other, a big one I've been working on for years. And I start to integrate the energy of that. Maybe over time, through working with some of my big others, including ones that are really scary, really disturbing, really objectionable, I actually start to see, I'm not just a peaceful, agreeable person. Sometimes I'm also really aggressive and powerful. I didn't used to be that way. I used to be all shy. And I used to hate those aggressive people. But I used to see, no, I too can be an aggressive person, for example. Or I think, I'm not a loving person. I'm tough and I'm not sensitive. I'm strong in that kind of tough way. But I learn over time that there's also a vulnerable or loving side to me. And it helps me become more of my wholeness. So that's a possibility for us. And sometimes it means facing things that we think are not who we are. It happens all the time. Or it comes out in our behavior. You think you're such a nice person, but your friends say, why are you so nasty? Me? And then you find out, hey, I have a nasty side, and you explore it some, you realize, God, I'm sick of being nice all the time. Sometimes it helps be a little bit nasty. Okay. For example, a little example. Okay, so here's the exercise. Let me read through it. So maybe we'll do this in pairs. Take about 10 minutes each. I think we can do this. Maybe we'll do a demo, short demo. So worker, jeez. Wish I had a cough drop. Step 2, worker. Bring to mind a main disturbing other in life. Imagine this person or kind of person and notice what bothers you most about this person. Okay? And then what is the main energy or quality that disturbs you? See how clearly you can distill the main disturbing energy or quality. For example, negative all the time. Okay? Okay? Step 3. Now, temporarily drop all content, even this person, your history together, and partly even your own identity. Drop it for a moment, and then temporarily explore this expression for the moment. As fully as you can, embody this energy. See what's good and useful about it. Try sitting like the one who's negative all the time. Whatever, right? Play with it. And then find a motion that somehow expresses that energy. Yeah, negative all the time. Negative, 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 whatever, okay? Find a motion, yeah? And then, if you're doing it in a partner, and then imagine relating and speaking as this one does. Yeah, something wrong with you, something wrong with you. Yeah, I like that. It feels kind of good. And then get any support, because sometimes we start to explore this and we feel really uncomfortable. It's like, I can't stand this. So you might need a little bit of support to explore it, okay? Then, especially if you have a hard time embracing this energy, imagining you're auditioning for a theatrical part that requires you to embody this quality or energy to get that role. Okay? All right. Step 4. Next, see if you can make a gesture that fully expresses this quality or energy, not your reaction to it. Does that make sense? Not your reaction to it. Not like, that terrible energy. No, it's that negative about everything. Yeah? So find a gesture that explores it, that expresses it fully. And then once you've found that gesture, slow that gesture down to a still point. Let's say it's this. I don't know what your gesture will be, of course. And then this is the subtle part. This is really not so easy, but you can do it, I think. You find, let's at this most subtle level. Because the essence level, it's not negative. It's not dualistic. So at the surface, it's negative about everything, but at the essence, it's just about creating clarity. That seems to be the essence of it for me. Yeah? And then step 5, how could you benefit from bringing more of this quality or energy into your life? And you realize, oh my gosh, I'm so wishy-washy. And if I had more of this bringing clarity energy, I'd just be a lot happier. I would get more done, and wow, it'd be wonderful. Okay? And then what support might you need to integrate it more? And then share a bit with your partner. Any questions about the exercise? Should we do a short demo? Short demo?
Yes.
Anyone? You do it? Yeah?
No, I'm not volunteering.
Oh. Anyone volunteer to do a short demo?
What type of demo?
Just to come up here for a short demonstration. I'll walk you through the exercise. Great. Come on.
Phil,
Thank you.
Phil, do you want to talk up?
Thank you for coming all the way up here.
Thank you for having us.
Okay. Pair up with somebody. Take about 10 minutes each. I know you might not get through the whole thing, but maybe just a few steps is good enough. I'll call, about the 10-minute mark so you can switch. So we get some time to explore and a little time to kind of share about it at the end. Is it okay? Go ahead and take about 10 minutes each. Go ahead and pair up with somebody.
After I transfer and you suggested, hey,
So
the table.
we have a few minutes.
I don't think I'm gonna.
Who has a quick, something you want to say about the exercise, or a quick question, or anything? How many of you found something a little interesting in your exploration? Oh, that's really cool. That's really cool. All right. Anybody like to share a short little something? Yes.
In our exercise, we discovered that the thing we found annoying in the other person was the mirror opposite of what we found annoying in the other person. In other words, what annoyed her was what I was like, and what I found annoying was what she was like.
Good
Okay, we've been friends for years.
Sounds like fun. Cool. Anyone else? Yes.
Well, I really felt like the physical motion was where it became key. Like, was where I could find what I was doing. If I hadn't been looking at And that the whole, I was really surprised how much, for both of us, as soon as we found that motion, it was like, oh.
Yeah.
There was just, it was so, just changed the whole thing.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, because this is a funny thing. I mean, I've only learned one way of working with essence work, but going from a disturbing energy to the essence of things, for whatever reason, movement is a fantastic way to explore it. Sometimes when we just use our mind, we can get really lost in a thing. Movement's a fantastic way to explore it. There was someone, you were first and then you, okay? Yes.
I was just struck by, it wasn't so much, well, a little bit the motion, but just realizing that what I found so offensive in them and denying and, invalidating actually was coming from their enormous helplessness and vulnerability.
Oh, what a fantastic insight. Wow. You might find that that's something that can actually start to change or even transform a relationship, because maybe you're right, and that could be a place where understanding starts to take hold. Wonderful, good for you, yay. Thanks for that. Yes?
Mine was within the, it's about me, it was about me, and then it morphed into it's about me.
Yeah.
So that it was like an opening of my heart instead of,
Wow.
it-
Beautiful.
It was in the movement too. so
Wow,
it's cool.
wonderful. That's again something that maybe it can be like more of an opening into this person or your connection.
Right.
Wonderful, good work.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
So I didn't quite get that. It's about,
Well, you didn't see the gesture.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's about me. The attitude was about, the person feels like it's about me, but as I got into the essence of it, my hand started rubbing my own heart instead of,
Oh, cool.
so that I would take care of me.
Oh,
It's about taking care of me.
Yeah, yeah.
That was the
yeah,
gift.
thank you.
Yeah, yeah, wonderful. Yeah. Anyone else? Feel something? Yeah, so here's the thing. This thing about walking a mile in someone's shoes, it's something that I know for myself, I don't practice it enough. But on the times when I do practice it, it makes a difference. So I'd suggest, if this appeals to you, you were a little bit encouraged from your exploration tonight, for example, practice it a little bit. Think about the different situations you're in, different people, conflicts, tensions, what have you, and you can play with it. Or if you're a facilitator or a leader or something where you're dealing with group dynamics in families and teams, what have you, it's a great skill to play with the different energies, perspectives, styles, etc. that may exist. And it could give you, you might find it may give you more fluidity and openness to the groups that you're working with. I invite you. Yeah, Gary.
So I have a question. This may be more than you want to deal with right now, but I'm a little bit confused because there's really what you're encouraging us to do is sort of make this empathic bond with the other, basically, right?
Yeah, sure.
And, but then at the same time,
But kind of, you're making an empathic bond kind of with yourself via an energy that either is from another person or appears to come from another person.
right, great. But then there's this other side, which is sort of like in political movements where you're needing to stand up against oppression.
Absolutely.
Or like you're saying in a group, if you feel like you're being marginalized, you'll fight.
That's right,
So
absolutely.
When do you work this other process?
It's a great question. It's a great question. I think you have to follow your own signals and dreaming process, because sometimes the process suggests this is the time to fight, and I'm gonna do it, and you fight. Sometimes we don't fight enough. And sometimes it's also a moment where you fought, you really stood up fully for your own side, but maybe there's something, for example, about the other that you feel like you haven't been open enough to. And you think, okay, I'm still going to fight, but I also want to get to know the other a little bit more, especially as that other may reflect something inside myself, for example. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. Sometimes I think working with the other can help enhance your ability to fight. Because how many of you have experienced this, for example, like in social activism work, where you get polarized, but after a while, after months or years, you also get burned out. You know that one? Yeah. So here's the thing, sometimes we get too one-sided, and there's something about being too one-sided that lends itself to burnout. Whereas if we can get onto one side, but we can also get onto the other side, and again with this idea of wholeness, that maybe there's something bigger that can hold the conflict and the polarity, and we find that in that wholeness, there's not a question anymore of sustainability of burnout. I feel like in my wholeness, I understand this part, I understand that part, and I can just keep rolling for infinity, you might find. But sometimes we have to really strongly go into one side, really strongly go into the other side. But here's one of the funny things about doing a lot of self and other work, is you might find that doing it a lot, you notice that there's something larger that in a sense is doing the different roles. It's almost like you're a big whack-a-mole kind of platform, and you just sometimes do this and you sometimes do that, but there's something larger in the background that is open to diversity, including some really nasty stuff. And that sometimes can be a way to do sustainable activism work over time. I love your question, I don't think it's asked. So anyway, folks, it's 9 o'clock. Thank you so much, I really appreciate it. Thanks again to Occupy Santa Rosa. If you'd like to leave a little bit of money for the organization, please put it in a pot. Thank you.
And you join our mailing list. Thank you. Look, feel free to hang around and talk. We're going to be stacking up chairs and stuff.